Hey Rebecca, how's it going?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Hey, let me just
Good.
connect my audio real quick.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Yeah, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well. Just have lots of things to study for, but
Oh, I'm
otherwise doing
sure.
good.
I forget, were you a first year student or a second year student?
I'm first year, so thankfully
First year.
not as much as second years, but
Well, you're getting in the groove of things. Because you must have
yeah.
started school now. It's probably, are you about a month in? How far in?
I think we're on like week 8 or something.
Week
So,
eight, couple months in.
yeah.
Nice.
Yep. We're almost done with our second block, so that
Oh,
goes by
wow.
fast. Hmm.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I'm in my third year as well, and
Oh,
so
wow.
it just goes by so quick.
Where are you located?
So I'm at UW. I should probably change my name
Oh,
too.
nice.
Mhm. Are you at the which
I'm in the
campus are you?
Pomona campus.
Pomona, nice.
Mhm.
That's- Yeah, did you have any questions before we get started this morning?
Not really. I just wanted to, I saw the ones that were bolded, the questions, so I'm assuming those are the ones we're probably going to go through
Yeah, I
at the
thought
end.
those would be good ones to go through
Perfect.
just throughout. It's pretty
Yeah,
informal. We're just gonna sort of talk about the basics of interviewing and those sorts of things. So
perfect. Sounds good. Are people actually attending? That's what I wasn't sure. Or is this going to be like a recording that gets sent out?
it's both actually. So
Oh,
usually
perfect.
we don't have as many people attend, and then
Mhm.
a lot more people watch the recording. But
Yeah, makes sense. That's
definitely, it's
perfect.
always hard getting the right time for everyone. But
Hmm. I get that.
hey, Stephanie, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Nice to see you on this wonderful Saturday morning.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. That's cool. You got a blurry background. I haven't really messed
Yeah.
with that too much. But
Yeah, it just makes it easier, right? Like there's the different Zoom backgrounds, and then the blurry one is always the easiest.
mhm. Yeah, less distractions that way for sure.
Exactly.
So Hannah isn't going to be able to make it. She's the other individual who puts these on with me.
Okay.
And so I'll just be leading this, or the three of us will be leading this. And like I said, we'll just go over basically the interview and sort of our experiences and what we went through and how we prepared. Um, but we'll get started probably a little bit after 10. We
That's
like to
fine.
wait for people to trickle in. So
Oh, definitely.
sounds good. Did you have any questions before we get started?
Um, I don't think so. Not right now. I guess,
Okay.
are they going to be able to write in the chat, or is it closed so only the host can see the chat?
Yeah, so they could definitely write questions in the chat, and so all of us can see that. So we try to get to those as much as possible for sure.
Excellent.
Hello, everyone. We'll wait to get started here in a little bit. Just waiting for people to trickle in, so just hang tight. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So to introduce myself, I'm Indabir Baines. I'm a MS3 student at the University of Washington, and I've been working with Med Mentors for about a year. Along with Hannah, who was unable to make it today, we put on panels just to provide information and topics of interest to medical students to help them in any way, shape, or form. Um, and so I have two wonderful panelists this morning. I have Stephanie, who comes from Rush. She's MS3. And then I have Rebecca, who is MS1 starting at Western, who's here today as well. So I'll let both of you introduce yourselves first off. Let Stephanie go first.
Awesome. Yes. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. My name is Stephanie Moss. I use she and her pronouns. I'm an MS3 at Rush, actually taking a gap year to finish off my step 1, which I took on Tuesday of this week. So I'm really glad to have that done. And I also have a husband who's an MS3 at Rush with me. Oh, and I guess I should say I'm at Rush Medical in Chicago.
Yes, that's awesome. Thank you guys for having me today. My name is Rebecca Shanik. I'm a first-year osteopathic student at Western University. I'm at the Pomona campus, and I was just sharing a little bit earlier that we're kind of finishing up our second block here. So I have a little bit of experience, but obviously still new to it. So I'm still getting my grips with everything.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for introducing yourselves for both of you. And so first off, this session is recorded and it's actually currently being recorded. As you joined in on Zoom, I think it prompted you with that sort of box that pops up. So be cognizant of that, and whether or not you want to be recorded, turning your camera on or your voice, just be aware of that. And then other things throughout this. So we'll be talking about sort of the interview and what to expect in our experiences. We're going to share that today. And so if you have any questions, specific questions that we're not talking about or answering, feel free to go ahead and pop them in the chat and we'll try our best to get to them. And be on the lookout for a recording of this event as well. We should be sending an email out shortly after. So with that, we'll get started. Perfect. Sorry about that. Is she's okay. Sorry about that. So how about you two? How about we get started talking about our interview experiences and how we got to medical school, sort of the obstacles we faced. Did we have to apply more than once? How did we go about that? And so feel free to chime in.
Sure, I guess I can start first. So I graduated college. I almost said high school. College in 2013. And in 2013, I graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder with a degree in psychology. And then I also had a minor in leadership, a minor in dance, and a certificate in neuroscience. And I had worked all through college to make sure I could pay for things. But additionally, I was able to receive scholarship. And then I took 2 gap years. The first year I was gonna apply, but we determined that it was just going to be better to wait an additional year because I had my wedding that summer. And then I believe that's when I actually took I think I took my first MCAT my senior year of college, and I did not do well. I actually failed it, and I had so much anxiety during it. It did not go well. And so I was thinking of taking it again and applying, and I decided, whoa, too much going on with having my wedding, plus graduating, plus I had some family deaths. And so it was just too much. So we got married. And then at that point, I decided, okay, we're going to take a gap year and apply the following year. So during that gap year, I was working as a caregiver for the elderly. And sorry, this is a while ago. I was working as a caregiver for the elderly, but then I realized I needed a full-time job. So I ended up working as a case manager for children with disabilities, bilingual case manager. So I ended up doing that a year. While also, I believe there was like a period where I restudied for STEP, and then, or STEP, wrong one, MCAT. This is college, going into med school, MCAT. I retook it. I was able to score what I need to be a Hispanic female. And then my husband also retook the MCAT because he also didn't score as high as he needed to. He needed a lot higher score because he is a white male. Next year, that was 2018. For some reason, it must have been that year is when maybe that's when we took MCAT. And then we started that summer. We submitted our applications in June of 2018. I myself submitted 43 applications. That's a lot. Why did I apply so many? Because I was applying dually with my husband, and there's no match program like there is in medical school. So what we did is we ended up applying to every major big city in the United States where had more than one medical school. And so since I scored on the lower end, I had to apply to both DO and MD schools. So I think I did about 15 DO schools and then like 20 MD schools, and same thing throughout. So like, for example, Chicago, there are 5 or 6 medical schools, both MD and DO. And he applied, I believe, to like 2 or 3 of the schools. And then I applied for everything else. And we did that for every single city. Okay, I ended up, and then so we submitted those in June, wrote secondaries, and then received interviews. I received 17 interviews, which was pretty amazing because that is almost 50% of the applications that I submitted, I received an interview. I only did 14 of them and I turned down a couple because since I was receiving them throughout the year, I really had to balance whether, like, especially like if my husband received, for example, if there was a city that there was only one medical school, I'll use Colorado as an example. We're from Colorado. My husband received an interview. I was denied. So right there, we were like, what do we do? However, I received an interview at Rocky Vista, the DO school. So I went to that interview. So I kept to that one. But if Rocky Vista didn't exist, he would have denied that interview. So it was really a game where we had to be really balance of like, should we accept that interview? And most of the time we did end up going to the interviews and just rejected the acceptance or waitlist levels. Understand that that was a very privileged position because most people only get 1 or 2 interviews. Let's see. And then let's talk about a little bit of how I prepared for the interviews. I was very lucky. Later.
So,
okay, sorry.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that. I just thanks for introducing like
I'm so sorry.
how you
yes.
went. No, you're good. How you went through the process and everything, and that looks different for everybody. And so, thanks for sharing that. And then Rebecca, sort of just talk through, how you prepare or how you got ready for medical school. I guess sort of your quick journey.
Yeah, so I attended college at UC San Diego, and then I graduated in 2018. And I decided to I applied for medical school the first time, like as a senior in college, and that did not work out for me, unfortunately. So then it actually ended up being a really awesome experience to have 3 gap years. And throughout my gap years, I did clinical research in hepatology and urology. And then this last year, I worked with COVID cases. So I think that allowing myself that extra time to kind of become more established, like as a professional, and then going into medical school was definitely good preparation.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that as well. Just a quick background for myself. I graduated high school 2013. I went to undergrad actually in Montana. I'm from Washington State. So I did 4 years of undergrad. I applied as a senior, or I guess, yeah, senior in undergrad, as a junior going into senior year. Took the MCAT, didn't do well. I didn't end up getting into medical school. And so I was a senior in the spring about to graduate. And I wish I would have thought more about my plan B and thought about that process. And so I was like, oh, shoot, I'm not accepted. What do I do? Thankfully, I was interested in a master's program, so I ended up going that route, and I did a master's in health policy and administration for a couple of years. Meanwhile, I kind of strengthened my application, retook the MCAT, and all that sort of stuff, and then I ended up applying a year into halfway through my master's for medical school, and thankfully I got in that time. So it goes to show you that all of us definitely had our own journeys getting to medical school, and so take that as you will. And so thanks for sharing that, everyone. Now we'll get into interviews a little more specifically. I guess if the panelists can speak to how they prepped for interviews, what resources did they use, or did they have sort of a workflow or something that worked well for them in general?
All right, I guess I'll go first for this one. So I interviewed during COVID, so I think that maybe I had a different experience than both of you, maybe so. But I pretty much just did a lot of research on the schools that I got interviews for, more in depth than I had done in deciding where I was going to apply. Because then I was like, well, okay, maybe they're interested in me, so I'm going to dedicate more time to looking more into this. So specifically like in their research, or are they community based, like things that they thought were important enough to post about like online. And so then of course I wanted to make sure that I was well versed in that going into the interview. And then I of course practiced with family members, like trying to make sure that I didn't sound awkward when I was talking to them. And then I had a friend who ended up getting into PA school. We were applying at the same time. So her and I would practice together, and that was really helpful, like having someone going through a similar process as you. And then also one of the positions I worked for, she offered to do like a mock interview, which was really helpful, getting her feedback. And so I would say I would recommend, practice multiple times and do your research so that you know what to expect.
I love that. I think that's one of the biggest thing is do your research on check their website, check their Facebook, check their Instagram, talk to people that are in the school. Like, you want to get as much ready and prepared as you can. And for me, it was so important because I knew every school, no matter what, is going to say, why you? And so the same thing, why them on the other side. So for every single school, I tried to come up with the why for why the city, why that school, and then I found something specifically that was special about their school, and I explained why that program. For example, at Rush, they have a family medicine leadership program. In addition to being an MD school and being in Chicago, that family medicine leadership program really interests me. So I tried to talk about in my interview why that program was so unique to my own passions, and how even if I wasn't really excited about that program, or if I actually got accepted there, wouldn't be part of that program, I want to show that there is something that would connect me to them. Another thing that I did a lot, since I flew for a lot of these interviews because I was in Colorado, so middle of nowhere. I would spend time on the airplane to the location reading my secondary interview, because you write so many secondaries and you just get messed up. Like, did I say that story? Did I already tell them it? And so I read that even the night before, that way I knew which stories I had already told them. And then I want to make sure during the interview, I said, oh, look, I either expanded upon those stories, not repeat, expanded, or provided new stories and examples. That's really important, because most of the interviews have read your primary application, have read your secondary application. They want to really get a sense of those interviews, of who you are and like what else can you bring in. And then, yeah, similar to Rebecca, I practiced with my husband, practiced with friends. Thankfully, I had practice interviewing like for jobs. So it's very similar to job applications. I would say the only difference is it's very focused on like you as an individual. Usually jobs don't really care. Like they just want to, I would say med school is very focused on what's special about you, because there are 1,000 other people that they read applications, well, more than 1,000, but at least like interview. They really want to get to know you as a person, what motivates you, what inspires you. And then you want to share that love, whatever that is, whatever that passion is that makes you, like whatever makes you tick, you want to share that and leave it on the table after, when you interview.
Yeah, excellent. I think you guys make great points. The last thing you want is to come into interview and not really know so much about the school or what things that they offer to their students. Just knowing those things shows that you're really interested in their school. And I think Stephanie has an interesting background, having really traveled around the United States interviewing. You had to really really know the schools well. And in doing this whole process, it's hard to keep track of everything. And so I think you really need to be organized and know about each school, whether that's making like a Word document for each school and just staying organized that way. That could be very helpful. But I think the biggest advice that I personally can give is that just practice. You absolutely need to practice. There's different formats, of course, when you apply to medical school. That's something else you need to research before going. Like UW does a panel of 3 interviewers, and you sit there and they all ask you questions. And so be aware of that and practice as much as possible. Med Mentors is currently doing some mock interviews. And so that's a resource that can be used as well. And so schools offer that as well. I remember in undergrad, my pre-med advisor kind of sat down with me and did a mock interview where I dressed up and did the whole thing. So look for those opportunities. They're really important. The more you practice, the more ready you're going to be. So thanks for mentioning those. So if you had to reflect on sort of this process, what would you do differently if you kind of went back in time? Is there anything that you're like, darn it, I wish I would have spent more time on this, or I would have prepared differently?
You know what, there was definitely, there are good interviews and bad interviews. And I think one of the things for me personally was not get upset if you have a bad interview. I think that there were, there's particularly one interview that like sticks in my mind, where I went to a school and I had the dean of the school, and we were just not vibing. And I took that very personally. I thought it was something that I was doing that, and you know what, he just didn't like me. Our personalities clashed, and the fact that he was the director, that my anxiety went through the roof, knowing that, he could really make or break it. And instead of just letting go and forgetting about that and then still doing fine on the rest of my interviews for the day, that really kind of destroyed my motivations. And I really think it's so important to recognize that not all interviews are gonna go well. Not all the time will you come out and like that interview is gonna love you. You're sometimes gonna get to people just like they're humans, and they might not like you, and that's okay. Doesn't mean that you're a bad student. Doesn't mean you don't deserve to even go to that med school or any med school. It just means you don't vibe, and that's okay. So that's something that I wish I could have rethought.
I think for me, realizing, because in job interviews, sometimes like it's a little bit different than the med school interview. Like realizing that sometimes they actually respond to you. Like, so I feel like in job interviews, for example, like they are like, okay, like it doesn't necessarily become this engaging conversation, but sometimes in med school interviews it does, and which is a really cool thing. It's just being aware of that going into it, like, okay, they're gonna be engaged in what I'm saying, and that's gonna be a really cool thing for me going out on the end. So for example, the interview at the school I go to now, I thought it was going really poorly. Like when we were going through all the questions like about me, I was like, wow, this is bad. And this is actually my first interview for med school, like in that application year. So I was like, wow, well, that was just going to be like my practice one, right? Like the rest will go way better. And it ended up, that I got in, that it went well, but I didn't think it went well. And part of that was, like the people who were interviewing me were then like, okay, like, so tell me more about this. So then at the very end, they did say like, oh, like, I'd like to talk with you more about that in the future. So I don't know, just kind of like reading the room, even if it's like this virtual thing, and kind of see what's engaging to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of going off of that point, there's so much anxiety and thoughts that are on in your mind when you're coming into the interview room, right? And it seems like everything slows down and it's a tense moment. So, what sorts of things did you try or figure out that helped you maybe calm down or calm that anxiety during the interviews or the interview process? Is there anything specific that you can give advice for?
I would say just try to remain confident. I know it's hard to like have that confidence in yourself, but like realize that that they wanted you there. Like they obviously thought that you were good enough for an interview. So, be confident in that and like in your abilities and everything that you've done so far to get up to that point. And then, yeah, like I would just say like continue to do so. I know for some of our exams, like the people administering the exams, they tell us to do deep breaths. So I know that works for some people. So there's a variety of things probably that you could do.
Yeah, I like that, Rebecca. Yeah, I love the confidence thing. I and I know I did this before my MCAT, and I did this before STEP, but sometimes it helps if you have I create a playlist in my phone of just I call it my pump up music. And I just listen to it because I know that that provides me joy and happiness and really provides me that confidence. Sometimes it would be also calling my husband right before, being like, I'm about to go in, oh my God, like wish me luck, whether that's your mom, your dad, your best friend, like, you know, just hearing their voice or looking at pictures of my dog and being like, okay, you know, something that I pre-planned, and that's important. It's really hard to figure out, how do I deal with this anxiety when you're actively having anxiety, when you're actively nervous. It's really important before you go to the interview, already have a plan. Even if you've never gotten nervous before, plan for it, plan to be nervous, and that's okay. It's expected. You've worked so hard for this for so many years. And so it's gonna happen. You don't know when, you don't know how you react, but just know, have a toolkit already ready on your phone, or maybe put a picture in your folder of something that means a lot to you, but have something prepared and ready that you just know that when you look at it or hear it or feel it or whatever. I also had like people that brought in like their lucky tie or lucky, they had something that meant a lot to them that they could just feel or touch, the more you can incorporate the multi-sensories will just help really connect your brain away from the amygdala, which is the fear response, and really focus on where you're at right now.
That's a great point. Of course, everyone experiences different levels of anxiety, and how we cope with that is totally different. And so I think keeping in mind what works for you and figuring that out prior to these interviews is going to serve you well. So I think it's a very important point. For me, I think with anybody, the more practice or experience you have in those situations, you're going to end up being more prepared and just better able to deal with situations. So I would stress just practice. I know that the more interviews I got through, the more comfortable I got, the less anxious I was going into them. So the more prepared you are beforehand, it's going to serve you better as well. So moving into some other sorts of questions. I know when you first enter the room, it seemed like in every interview, the first question they ask is, well, hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself. Who are you? What's important? Just usually they leave it at tell me about yourself, and then they all turn to you and want to listen. And so how do you tackle that question? It seems pretty overwhelming, because where do you start?
I loved that question because I knew it was always going to happen. It was always why you and why us. So for why you, why us, I actually had it written out, and I had practiced it over and over and over, because I knew that it's gonna come up. And I love that someone said, respond to questions without rambling, because that is me. I ramble when I get nervous, I stutter. And so I knew, for me personally, if I had something written down, even if I don't say every single word correctly, or if I completely forget, I know in my mind that I had this down, and I just practiced that over and over. So, and then for other questions, sometimes I did the same thing. It was really helpful when schools gave questions that I had already written about, for a secondary, I was able to pull that example. But for me, when I'm talking about the why me, I think it was important for me to emphasize what made me tick, what motivated me to get up in the morning. Right now, as just a pre-med student, and what will motivate me also when I am a med student. Because everyone can have like the typical examples that at the end, everyone's so similar. So it's when we're applying. So really I focused on like what motivates me, and described like internal motivations. And I think that provided a very interesting aspect. Instead of just spitting out like things for my resume, they've already read that before. What they haven't read is maybe more emotional type things. And so that was, for me, something that helped.
I definitely agree with what Stephanie said. Like, I think what you said, like about what makes me me, is so important. Like you definitely want to be genuine and not have some sort of like cookie cutter answer that everyone else is going to have. So for me, I didn't necessarily share about medicine in that type of question, like tell me about yourself, like because obviously everyone's here because they want to do medicine, like, or at least that's probably why they should be here. So for me, it was more like what makes me like the person who I am, or like how is their school going to develop me into the physician that I want to be, and like with the moral values, or the goals that I want to have as a person in my life. And so I think I really had to investigate that in myself before going into interviews, like what about me is going to be an interesting thing, especially because there are so many people and they're interviewing all day long for the whole season. Like you might just get lost like in the numbers if you don't necessarily stand out. So I think use that question as a way to stand out. And I'll just say, for example, like some of the things that I shared, like non-medical wise, like I enjoy camping and hiking, and I have a husband and a dog, like things that they can kind of connect to, like maybe that they're interested in or something, like because we're not all medicine all the time. Like you got to have a humanistic side. So yeah, those things.
I agree. It is so important. I think it's always go, 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 medicine, good grades, and all this, school, school, school. But to be honest, everyone who walks in there has that background. If you tell them something other than that, that's something they're going to remember, like camping or fishing, or like, that might perk someone's ears and they're like, oh, yeah, that one student went to that one park and that was really interesting. And it's just different things to where they can remember you, and that might help you later on when they're trying to select for students for acceptance and whatnot. So I think this is a really good question from the audience, and Stephanie talked about it a little bit already. Were there any general structures for responses to help efficiently respond to questions without rambling? Was there sort of a structure in how you went through answering? Tips on that?
I think I really had to, because for me, I use filler words, and I realized that when I was practicing for interviews, I used like and and maybe I did today. I don't, probably did, because now I'm not in the interview process. But I really had to kind of like remember like not to do that, like actively be like, okay, I'm not going to say those specific words, like just to fill the time while I'm trying to process things. So sometimes I would even take a little bit of time right after the question to think about it. And I think that they do like to see that you're thinking about it a little bit and not just like giving them a response that you had already, come up with, even if you did already come up with one. So that would be my suggestion.
I like that. It's so hard. I do it, I still do it to this day. And I love the idea of like taking a moment, maybe even say it out loud, like, oh, that's a good question. Like let me think about that for a moment. That really helps you catch your breath, or really think, okay, I'm going to say this and then go forward. But you know what? Sometimes when it's a question you've never heard about before, never thought about before, sometimes it's helpful to just speak from the heart. If you speak from the heart, then those filler words don't come as often, because you believe in what you say, and it's connected to your heart. So it's so easy. So there's less of a chance that you'll ramble or have those like and but right there. But the biggest thing is say, oh, thank you. That's a good question. I've never thought about that before, or let me think about that, or give me one moment, something like that.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And I think just being honest, like, what, that's a great question. Can you give me a little bit to process or think about that? They're not gonna give you negative points or think badly if you're doing that. That just shows honesty. And that's something that's super important in medicine. When you're not prepared for something, you got to be honest about it. You're not going to just do something that maybe you're not as prepared for. But Yeah, I think how I would approach it would be I would always try to make sure I understood the question that they're asking. And so oftentimes sort of repeating what they asked you, that would also buy me some time to sort of think through my answer as well. And then it would make sure that I had understood their question correctly. And so that's a good tool that I found that was helpful. Another question was, have you had an interview where they provided the names in advance? Did anyone use that to their advantage or do something about that?
Oh, yes. I loved when they did that because I actually quickly looked them up on my phone, figure out what type of physician, if they're first, are they a physician? Are they an administrator? Are they a student? And then I really tailored to whatever they are. And even better, if I found something that they like, for example, biking, let's say they're biking. Oh, I might just happen to slip in biking. Or one time I had a situation where I biked and I loved it. You know, try to connect with them. Especially like if they're specialty or they do a specific type of research you're interested in. How amazing would it be if you talked all day? Like they might not even ask you any of the questions. Actually, my husband had a situation like that when he interviewed. They didn't ask him a single question. He just walked in and the interview said, "Hi." That's it. No questions asked. And it was a conversation. It was to see if he was a real person, how he interacts in like, just like almost like they were sitting from across each other, drinking a cup of coffee. And that would have been hard for me. But at the same time, like they just wanting to get to know you, even if they're asking questions or not asking questions, even if it's the MMI, it's really just to figure out who you are and if you're a good person and good, honest person, like was said before.
Yeah, I would say only one of my interviews did I know ahead of time, and that was because they copied them on the email. I don't know if that was like supposed to happen or not, but like they were there, so I was like, I'll definitely look at like because each school normally has like a faculty list, and you can kind of read about each person and what field they're in or what they're teaching. And so for that specific person, I think they were like in immunology. So I was like, well, I have some understanding of this field or, like kind of what interests are in that field and got to connect with them that way. And so I definitely recommend if you do know to do your research, but in my other interviews, I didn't know. So I guess just kind of be prepared for either way it could go. And if you don't know, then to just prepare like as a whole, maybe read a little, like skim all of the faculty. Like I know that maybe seems like a lot, but and you don't have to memorize everyone, just kind of get an idea to put a face to a name.
Yeah, I think definitely looking at, because I remember at UW we had a physician, an administrator, and a researcher. So you really had different types of people sitting at the interview table. So I think just being well versed in their background serves you well. Something that you don't have to do, something that I did, I don't think it helped me get into medical school at all, but I just wrote thank you letters and I kind of had them prepped. And so I gave that at the end of the day, like for example, at the UW interview, at the end of the day, I just gave it to like their admin staff and they had provided that to the interviewers. So maybe think about that. Or I know some people like to send emails, especially with COVID. I'm sure that's sort of what a lot of students have been doing as well. Kind of moving along, answering some other questions. Thanks for sending questions in the chat, by the way. This is super great. Someone had asked about MMI formats in certain schools. Did anyone have some experience about written sections during that interview process? During the MMI, I believe is what they're asking. And if there's any tips for that.
Yeah, I can say that my MMIs did not have a written component. I've heard of that though. So if you do know ahead of time that your school is going to be doing that, try to practice some free writing. Maybe look up online like what kind of questions could be asked. but I myself don't have experience with that. So I'm sorry, but I do have experience writing a lot of secondaries. So I would say, I'm sure you do too.
I know what I was going to say no, and then I thought about it. And I was like, oh wait, yeah, I did. I think it was a New York school that did it, and I love the idea that Rebecca just said of free writing. But the hard thing about MMI, you don't know what type of questions they're going to be. Some schools I remember were actually having to do with medicine, and one of them I feel like they put us in a sim lab and they were like, go. And then another one, they were like, here's this random like practice, like almost like a puzzle. And they just wanted to see how we would act if we would maybe they would think like if we freaked out and started cursing, maybe that's not the best thing. So it was, you can't prepare that much for the MMIs. Yes, there are questions you can look at, but the interesting part of the MMI is that they're really trying to see how you think on your feet when it's something that you have maybe no background in. So yeah, I think for the practicing for the MMIs, practicing those relaxing techniques is super important. And then I saw another question that I wanted to answer, something about, the thank you letters. Yes, thank you letters are super important, and the difference between thank you letters and letter of recs. So I did a mix between thank you letters, email, thank you letters written down and mailed in. And I don't have any data on this. Well, I probably could have done it, but I kind of feel like the ones that I emailed, I don't want to say I didn't get into those schools because I can't remember it because it was so long ago, but I do remember the ones that I mailed in, I did get in, or I did have like a wait list instead of just being rejected. There's just something so personal. And I think the idea is anyone can type up something or copy and paste and press send it, or type up something and put it in the thing. There was something so meaningful about them receiving something physical, but also some schools were very set, we will only accept. So make sure right before you leave, go to the admin of whoever's there and be like, I would like to send a thank you letter. Is it appropriate for me to email them or mail them? Because yeah, maybe if you mail them, maybe it'll get thrown away, or maybe. So it's important to ask them. It's not weird. I remember I was awkward at first, but a lot of people ask about it. So it's just a thing that they're like, yeah, you can send them an email this, or you can send them this way. But I would highly recommend mail it if you can, just put to the person the name, and you can even ask them while you're there for the correct address or whatever. And then the difference between letter of intent, that's different. I did send letter of intents, but those should be very separate from your thank you letters. Thank you is thank you for meeting with them. And then put in a sentence of something that was mentioned during that interview, that either about them or something that you said, just to really connect it back that you were the person. Because if you just write the same thing you did for every single thank you letter, it's not that meaningful. And to help me in my notebook, right at the end of every single interview, I just bullet pointed what we talked about. This doctor has 2 kids, has a dog. We talked about our both love for OBGYN, something like that. So just a little tidbit about that.
If you had something to add, Rebecca, go for it.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, just as Stephanie had mentioned about like adding those little tidbits, like it makes the letter more personal. For me, I would, for example, say like, I really appreciated talking with you about this. And like a lot of the time it did have to do with medicine, like what we were engaging about, because obviously that's what they're passionate about, because it's, whatever specialty they're in or something. And so I would just mention, like, I really appreciated talking to you about global health and like how we can impact the community, like whatever that's going to look like. And I think that it helps them remember who I am, or who you are.
Yeah, definitely. And this goes back to, if you also got to do research on your interviewers, you could also prep with that as well. There's a couple questions that are asking, Rebecca, you're going to be the star here. It's asking about online interviewing. And Stephanie, maybe you had some Zoom interviews as well. I know I didn't. This is pre-COVID. And so sort of how did you prepare your background and what things did you consider in getting ready for that sort of screen time for interviews?
Yes. So it can be many hours sitting in front of the computer, but like so I wasn't used to like the Zoom world, I think before, because I had not been in school during Zoom, like what do they call it? Like Zoom University. So I would say like this type of background is probably appropriate. I would probably take my picture off the wall. And that's pretty much, it wasn't this wall because I lived somewhere different, but something similar would be probably perfectly fine, or another professional setting. I know I have some professors who teach out of their office, they have like books behind them. I mean, that's probably really studious. So if you have a bookcase, maybe if you want to do that. And then obviously they're only seeing your top half, but definitely dress for the whole thing. I know people who didn't, like they only wore a professional top half, and I don't know why they did that. But obviously if you stand up and you're in your sweatpants, that does not look good. And plus like the confidence aspect of wearing your suit or whatever you're gonna wear definitely helps, I would think. And other things about online besides the setting, I know someone asked a question about like how you get a feel of the culture of the school in a virtual setting. And like I mentioned, it could be depending on your school, it might be like pre-recorded videos where you watch like all these different things like about the curriculum. Like pretty much every school is going to share different things that they want you to learn about. And so I had a few schools that did pre-recordings, like where you could watch them a few days before, and then you were only there like on the interview day for that period of time that you're actually in an interview. And so it was shorter, but sometimes they had like live presentations via Zoom. And so you would be sitting there for a while. So like make sure you're prepared for that, have your water or whatever. And then getting a feel of the culture of the school was challenging in a virtual setting, but sometimes they had little mixers that you could attend the night before or something, like to get to know other people or like current students. And so I think that that was a helpful way to ask questions like in a more comfortable setting, even though it was virtual.
Yeah, that's wonderful. With COVID still looming, I'm sure a lot of medical schools, especially currently, are still doing a lot of virtual interviews. Someone asked a question about, did you prepare any healthcare policy or current event related questions? If so, what helped? So take it away.
Oh yeah, that's a good one, especially for the like MMIs or whatever those are called. Because those I feel like is where they came up. Definitely, we're in COVID, so I hope you've read up on COVID. By my time, I think it was the Affordable Care Act. But what the things that I kept on my mind, I made sure I was subscribed to just the emails from New England Journal of Medicine. Those would at least talk about what the current themes are in medicine that people are talking about right now. Current themes, obviously COVID, maybe talking about ethics. I know at my time it was abortion, but obviously right now the big ethical thing is ventilators. Should ventilators be given to individuals who are unvaccinated when you have another individual that is vaccinated, or another individual for something else? So that might come up. Ethics are a big one. Another one that might come up is burnout. Burnout is huge in medicine, and we're really starting to talk about it, of how to prevent burnout, mental health, talking about if you see a colleague that did something unethical, how would you react, stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with Stephanie. All of those are definitely hot topics and like things that you probably normally hear about if you keep up with the news. Then so like something that at least maybe you have some sort of opinion on and that you can kind of formulate an idea, because they do want to hear your opinion. Like you can't just be like, I'm neutral. Like they want to hear one way or another. At least that's my opinion about that subject. And then another thing that she didn't mention yet was like global warming. That was something that I got asked about. And so like different things that you as a physician can be playing a part in, and they kind of want to hear your perspective on that. And then I would say be able to have an understanding though of the opposite side. So for me, like I have my opinion and then I'm like formulating like, well, I could see why they might think that. And like, so that you can kind of come at it from both sides, like to have a common understanding between two groups. Because ultimately, like when you're practicing as a physician, not everyone's going to agree with your opinion, and you kind of have to work together in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was really helpful. You want to look up the key issues that are currently taking place during like COVID, obviously during this time. But like our school, I remember they like to ask, you know, if you had $1 million, what would you spend it on? You know, I know there's really no clear-cut answer to this, but they're really trying to think, hey, what's important to you? What do you find that's important, and how would you address that? And so it's kind of an overwhelming question, but overall, they want to know that you're active and you're paying attention, because it's really important to us as professionals to pay attention to this kind of stuff. Let's see. Did you guys see any other questions that hopefully we got to most of them in the chat?
I actually want to bring up the, I didn't want to talk about it before, but if we're done, I might, or one of the things that someone talked about was the letter of intent. And that's really a really good question, because there's a lot of confusion regarding when to send the letter of intent. And there are different couple ways to do it, but one thing's for sure, you do not want to send a letter of intent to all the schools you interviewed at. They recommend 1 or 2, just stay on that. And there's also something a little different. So a letter of intent is saying I really, 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 really love your school. And if I had the opportunity to be accepted, I would go to that school. It doesn't mean 100% you're going to, but they see that as really special. And let's say you send it to 2 schools that are in the same city. That might be a little suspicious. And what if they talk? So you never know exactly. I think I actually did send a couple letter of intents. So I didn't just do one. However, I also talked about like my situation of, hey, my husband's been accepted in this city. I really also want to be accepted in this city. And I also sent it to only the ones that were on the wait list. If you've been denied, you can't send a letter of intent because they've already denied you. This one I have to give to Rebecca because it was so long ago, but I don't think I wrote letter of intent before I received an answer of whether I was waitlisted or accepted. You might, but I'm not 100% because I can't remember. But I do definitely remember being on the wait list and sending letters of intent. And I did also something, if you're applying with a partner or a friend or a sibling, I did send, both my husband and I sent letters to every single school that we didn't hear back from. It's before the interviews though. Well, we did both. We did before interviews because I know, and that actually allowed my other partner to also get an interview. So that actually happened at Rush. I got an interview at Rush and my husband didn't get anything. And so I wrote a letter to them like, hey, my husband also applied to Rush. I would love him to be at the interview with me. Can you maybe relook at his application? And they did. They gave him an interview and then we were both accepted. And that happened actually a couple times where we were able to interview at the same school or like at different dates, but that additional letter I think is, and that one's not a letter intent. That was something very different that we did, but I highly, highly recommend it if you're applying with someone because it's so rare. They really want to accommodate you, and it's a greater chance that you'll go to their school if you have another friend or partner that's also accepted. You know, they see that as already a positive thing because you have that support structure already there. So just an additional thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that talking through letter of intent, like I mainly use that for waitlisted schools, but then I realized like the ones that I'd already been accepted to, like I'd be happy going to those. So there actually was one acceptance, which I thought was a little bit interesting. They called me because a lot of the time they do call you, at least in my experience, which was like really nice and personable. But one of them called and said, so we want to like admit you, but we also want to know, like, would you denounce all the rest of your admissions for us? And I was like, oh, that's a big thing. Because for me, like I'm from Southern California, like my husband is kind of stuck here with his profession. So I was like, well, I kind of want to stay in Southern California just for that reason too, to have a support system. So I guess keeping all those different things in mind.
Yeah, wonderful. Hopefully that answered the question. I can't speak to letters of intent a whole lot. I was lucky enough to get accepted to UW early on in the process. And so then I was like, all right, we're good. I'm going to UW. So I really didn't have to do a lot of that, thankfully. But yeah, thanks to both of you today for speaking about interviews. I think it's been really helpful, both Stephanie and Rebecca. And hopefully we answered a lot of the questions in the chat as well. I think we actually got to all of them pretty well. So if you guys would be okay with providing maybe your contact information, feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions. I'm sure all of us are very willing to answer questions that you may have. And so thank you for attending this session as well. And feel free to ask us questions, and good luck on the interview season ahead. I'm sure some of you have even gotten interviews and everything. So good luck, and thank you for being part of the event.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll put my email in the chat if anyone wants to email me.
Yes, I put down my information below too. So thank you everyone for coming, and good luck.
All right, thank you guys. I think I'll head out. Gotta go do something.
Nice meeting you both.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, thank
on
you.
your
I
years.
appreciate the time. Yeah, you
Thank you,
too.
guys.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.